looks right, throws a deep pass, right side, end zone, it's caught, it's a touchdown. And the Cardinals continue to pour it on.
Welcome to Cardinals Underground.
I'm not sure why I consistently start with a question here on Cardinals Underground. Paul Calvisi, Darren Urban, Kyle Odegard. Maybe I just feel truly isolated more than ever. Not just me away from mainstream society physically, but also in terms of culturally sometimes. For example, when's the last time you guys changed the screensaver on your phone? Just out of curiosity. Because listening to DeAndre Hopkins with the media, it makes it sound like, changing your screensaver, something you do. If there's a pressing topic or, something that's front burner, you put it on your screensaver on your phone. I'm like, that's pretty ingenious. Welcome to the modern era here, Calvisi. What's going on, Paulie Podcast? But I'm thinking, I can't remember the last time I changed my screen. Kyle, you're the young demo here on this Cardinals Underground. How about you? Is this a normal thing for you?
To be honest, I do not change mine a lot, but my wife always takes my phone and will put random pictures as my screenshot. So it's pretty entertaining. I'll go to it and I'll open it up, be like, wow, it's a random picture of somebody's dog on my phone. It's pretty fun.
I have an 11-year-old, my daughter, who just got her first phone for her birthday here at Casa Calvisi. And there's a lot of different stuff that's been texted my way in terms of Disney Plus and other things that apparently I need to know on a regular basis. It is to say, I don't really need to know that. But anyway, Darren, how about you?
I don't change it a whole lot. Usually I have pictures of the family on there in some way, shape, or form. But at the same time, you have all those apps sitting on the front anyway, so it's rare that you're really looking at the picture, to be honest.
Maybe this is just my way to avoid what is front burner right now, and that is, as we're just about to get the return of football and get football back, we're still talking about what's going to be missing. And in this case, we're talking about potentially the Cardinals starting right tackle making news this week. Darren, take it from there.
Well, Marcus Gilbert announced on Twitter this week that he was going to opt out for the season. And I guess in some ways it's really not that surprising. The deadline for opting out for players is later this week. And ultimately, it's probably a hard decision for a lot of guys, but especially linemen who are bigger, who might be in the high-risk category. And in fact, Gilbert tweeted that he was in the high-risk category. So it's really the first time the Cardinals have been touched at this point by coronavirus in that way. They were one of the few teams that had not had anybody say they were opting out and or put on the COVID-19 reserve list after the initial test. So you figured at some point the Cardinals would be touched, and now this is one of those ways, and we'll see if other guys decide to do the same.
We were talking about Nate Solder had opted out for the Giants. They're going to be going with the rookie Anthony Thomas. You have the Browns. They're looking at the rookie Jedrick Wills as their starting left tackle out of Alabama, a top 10 pick as well. And you're thinking, oh, man, that's really tough. I mean, the degree of difficulty there in having two key positions, two key tackles like that who've never even played a preseason game, and boom, they got to be ready to go regular season week one. And now, Kyle, Cardinals might be looking at a similar scenario with third-rounder Josh Jones, although the Cardinals do have two veterans as well.
Yeah, and I think at this point, if you're trying to rank it, I still feel like Justin Murray is the favorite to be the starter. He was the guy that filled in all of last season and did a pretty good job, especially toward the end. So I think Josh Jones would have to really look good in camp in order to leapfrog him. And like you said, you've got Kelvin Beachum in the mix too. If he plays well, he's a veteran. But it feels like, Marcus Gilbert was a wild card because of his injury history, but this is a guy who was a above average offensive tackle when healthy. So maybe he would have gotten hurt and you would have been in this situation anyways, but it's certainly a blow because if Marcus Gilbert recovered and looked good, I mean, if you can have two solid offensive tackles, that goes a long way, especially in a pass-heavy offense like the Cardinals might have.
You wish the best for everybody, obviously, and everybody makes their own decision for their own reasons. The BMI, the body mass index, has been a key driver for a lot of the linemen, both defensive and offensive linemen, to opt out. This is the fourth straight year that Marcus Gilbert will not finish a season. And based on what we saw last year in camp, based on what Sean Kugler, the Cardinals O-line coach, told us on the Big Red Rage a couple of months ago, that Marcus Gilbert was the best offensive lineman in the room when they started game week against the Lions before he got hurt in that Thursday practice, a non-contact injury where he tore his ACL. Darren, I'm just sort of bummed, not only because could he have been perhaps the Cardinals' best offensive lineman this year? I just wanted to see him. I want to see him, and what a bookend tackle duo, him and DJ Humphries, what that might have meant for Kyler Murray this year.
Well, I know that Marcus Gilbert was supremely motivated to come back what he did last year, or after what he went through last year. And you're right. I think there was a lot of optimism on what he could be. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury just last week, as the rookies were showing up, it was asked about the right tackle situation, and he basically said, you know, as long as Marcus Gilbert shows he's healthy, and the guy that got hurt before he got hurt last year, he's our starting right tackle. So I mean, he had the inside track to be back in that position as long as he was healthy. And by all accounts, it seemed like that's where he was headed. So it's a little disappointing, sure, given the circumstances. But the two things that popped in my head were, one, to think that any team is not going to be affected directly by the coronavirus when it comes to either players opting out or guys getting it and having to sit out a couple weeks, or some combination thereof, you're being kind of foolish, I think, at this point. And the other thing too is they've compiled a lot of offensive linemen. Now, a lot of tackles and guys that you, in theory, would be comfortable with playing. Now, the question becomes, can you afford another blow if something happens? I mean, this is essentially for anybody who opts out, whether it's Marcus Gilbert or the 6 or 7 Patriots or whoever it might be. You're essentially, it'd be like going to training camp and having them suffer a season-ending injury like the first day of camp. You know, that these things happen where you lose players. So it's not like NFL teams don't understand how to handle something like this. The question is now, how do you work with it going forward? And then can your team take any more body blows if guys that are playing do get hurt or do encounter something with the coronavirus?
I'm also bummed for us media members because Marcus Gilbert is an exceptional interviewer. I mean, he was so good on the Big Red Rage. I was ready to offer my contract at the end and replace Ron Wolfley, and Jim Almondro stopped me. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Although I will say this, Kyle, if it wasn't for the fact there are no preseason games and it's an abbreviated offseason / zero preseason, et cetera, I might put Kelvin Beachum as the clubhouse leader at right tackle. I know Justin Murray got the dozen starts, and he obviously has a leg up on the playbook, but just the fact Kelvin Beachum has been a starter like the last 7 years and a starting left tackle in this league and a team captain most recently with the Jets.
Yeah, and even going back to last year, Justin Murray was in a timeshare early on with Jordan Mills before Mills got hurt. So maybe you do give them both a look. And if Kelvin Beachum is the superior player, then hopefully, you know, he can get up to speed and then maybe he will take over that job. But like you mentioned, just because of Justin Murray's knowledge of the offense, the way he played down the stretch last year, I think there are enough factors going toward him that he's probably the favorite. But I could totally understand if Kelvin Beachum is the better player, then he's going to eventually find the field.
I am interested, you know, obviously Kelvin Beachum has played a lot of football and started a lot of games. The vast majority of them have been on the left side, and I'm not saying that's something that a guy can't overcome. It's a move guys make all the time. However, in the circumstances where you've already got a guy who you were fairly comfortable with by the end of the season playing your right tackle spot, and all we heard before we knew if Marcus Gilbert was going to be able to come back, before the draft happened and what the Cardinals might do in the draft, all we heard from Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury was how comfortable they were if they would have to put Justin Murray back at right tackle. So I think for all those reasons makes me pause a little bit, but there's no question that Beachum, and I haven't had a chance to meet the gentleman yet. He signed so late, and obviously we're not having a whole lot of interaction with players right now, but by all accounts, he's an incredibly smart player. And as you mentioned, he started 99 games in this league. So, you know, he's got that kind of ability and background that you think he could step in if that were the decision Cliff Kingsbury wanted to make.
And no doubt, that's a great point, that switching sides is no small thing. And going to that side. Well, look at Justin Pugh last year. Look what he did in New York, for example, right? He went out to right tackle, and then afterwards he just smiled and said, yeah, that is no small thing to try now. That was a position change for him, obviously, to go out the edge. But so right now, Cliff Kingsbury sharing with the media this week, they've started to get a sense as when they do go out on the field, Kyle, as a team, the veterans can go out on some of these walkthroughs. Coaches are trying to get a sense of that first hurdle in player evaluation. That is, do you know what the heck your assignment is and what you're supposed to do? And so right away, they can get a sense, okay, is Kelvin Beachum up to par? Could it really be a competition? Or is he behind like a lot of newcomers and rookies might be when it comes to the playbook?
Yeah, and I feel like something like offensive tackle, I don't think it's as intricate as other positions. I'm thinking more of somebody like Isaiah Simmons right now, who wants to prove that mentally I can catch up this quickly and already be in that rotation. Because no matter how athletic he is, if he's a quarter second behind reading things, it's going to be hard for him to make an impact early on. So that's one of the guys that I'm looking at the most is Isaiah, and then all the young guys to see how the rookies are progressing mentally, as well as the second year guys.
I mean, I always go back to Tyrann Mathieu and how in those DB meeting rooms, he was in the front row, and they said by the end of camp, he knew 3 different positions. It was amazing. He knew both safety positions, which were different, and the slot corner position. And so, you know, the coaches know, don't they, Darren? I mean, they'll have a grasp, and the coaches have to trust the player. I think I always dismiss that till you talk with a coach, and you can cite all these physical attributes and immeasurables, and a lot of them will shake their head and say, no, I have no idea if he's going to have deep third when he needs to have deep third, and some receiver just won't get a free gift of a touchdown. That's what a coach has to just not, they have to be so resolute in their trust in a player before he ever sees the field.
There's a reason why coaches tend to lean towards playing veterans and want to use veterans and shy away from starting rookies if they can avoid it. I mean, if you really look around the league, even the teams that play rookies, usually it's because they have to, which is why when we talk about Isaiah Simmons, like knowing they have Devondre Campbell already, I mean, okay, you've got a veteran. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Paul. I mean, if Isaiah Simmons is in those meeting rooms and he's doing Tyrann Mathieu things in terms of his knowledge, then maybe the coaches think differently once they get out on the field. But while they didn't have any of the on-field stuff in the offseason, they have had all those meetings. So in theory, they already do have a sense of what Isaiah Simmons is able to function with in terms of some of this stuff. And maybe they're not giving him the chance to learn all those different things. I mean, it's a little bit different when you're talking about Tyrann, who they might be going over some different stuff in a secondary meeting rather than Isaiah Simmons. I mean, how many chances are they putting him in a bigger kind of situation? Because really the things that we talk about with Isaiah Simmons and the things he does well, you would have to be in a bunch of different meeting rooms. I mean, if he's coming off the edge, do you want him talking to Brenson Buckner, or is he going to necessarily be talking to Bill Davis, or, are they going to talk to Marcus Robertson in the back end? I mean, it's to me a little bit different. So I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get at this point, but I think ultimately there's going to be something where they look at all that stuff and they're going to consider all that stuff, and it's going to be him on his own in a one-on-one situation, whether he can show he does it. I personally feel like early on in this season, the way this season has come together, do you really think that can happen now? I just don't know.
And I'm with you. I'm not minimizing the jump in any season from college to Pro Bowl. I've seen it 15 years worth of the preseason on the sideline. And Darren, you've seen it probably in the preseason too, how many rookies are just confused and they need to be coached up on the sideline, and it's still a process when the lights are on, et cetera. I guess my point is, if I put myself in the shoes of Isaiah Simmons, and man, would I love to put myself in his shoes at 6'4", 238.
Be a lot taller, Paul.
You don't have to ask me twice on that one, Paulie Pencilneck. I'll just say that for the record. But if a year ago I played over 100 snaps at 5 different positions, Kyle, and all of a sudden, yes, I've been elevated to the NFL. Yes, I've gone from basic math maybe to calculus, but there's only one equation, i.e. one position I have to learn versus a handful of different spots. I'm wondering if that makes it doable, possible, feasible for him to really contend for an opening day starter job.
And I think we also have to keep in mind his baseline level of talent, where you're talking about the number 8 overall pick. And there were so many quarterbacks that went before him that you're talking about, really a top 5 prospect as far as a different position. So I don't think we should lose fact of how much talent he has naturally, where he needs to get it mentally. But even if he's not a savant like Tyrann Mathieu was early, even if he's picking it up pretty well, his athleticism can still do some of that damage too. So it's that balance of finding a guy who's mentally equipped, and they also have to be physically equipped. And we know that he's an elite skill set type of guy. So I think that gives him a decent chance of finding a role pretty quickly.
Did you guys see the video of the Broncos players taking the field, leaving the locker room, and going what amounted to somewhere between a human car wash to maybe the metal detector at the airport, except there's a mister, you're walking through the mister, and it's a sanitizing fluid of some sort. With the Cardinals having taken the field this week for walkthroughs, do we have any knowledge if the Arizona Cardinals are employing a similar disinfectant strategy, if you will, Darren Urban?
I don't think they are. I can't speak to that for sure. That was an odd kind of thing, but again, don't forget that every single one of these teams, all their plans for protocols were signed off on by the NFLPA. So it's not just these teams coming up with it; it's also the NFL and the NFLPA saying, "Yep, that makes sense. Let's do that." So
what else do we know, Darren, about protocols? When we say protocols, I've heard and I've seen players tweet out around the NFL, some of the protocol playbooks are thicker than the actual offensive playbooks on these teams. What do we know or have we seen with the Cardinals so far? Anything in particular?
Well, I mean, I can say this. The list of things that players are going to have to kind of understand going forward there are a lot of them. And one of the things that the players have already seen doesn't really impact them right now, but like I know that they've already kind of set the guidelines with how road trips are going to go, and I'm fairly certain players have already looked at that. So when they start talking about protocols, not everything is just on a daily basis when you're going to the early part of practice. Some of it, for instance, is going to have to do with how you handle yourself at training camp, if you're staying at the hotel, what happens when you go on a road trip, all these different things. But there's a lot of them, and you have to stay on top of when and where you're supposed to get tested, and you got to be smart. I mean, we've seen it, Paul. Maybe we don't know all the exact details, or Derek Jeter talking about his players in Miami going to get a glass of milk, and I'm sure that's why they're leaving the hotel. But one of the things that's come out about some of the issues in baseball is these guys go on road trips. They're gone for a couple of days, and they don't want to sit in their hotel room all the time except when they're playing baseball. And that probably isn't going to work. And I think one of the things the NFL is going to try and do is, limit how long a team goes on a road trip. And I think there's going to be fairly strict rules for players and staff, for that matter, in terms of when you are out on the road, which is too bad because Cardinals do have some nice road trips this year. They're going, back to New York a couple of times, places you like to maybe if you had an extra day to go out and get about, and now that's probably not going to be possible. But if you want to have a season, if you don't want it getting derailed, you want to do everything in your power to make sure that you stay safe. And unfortunately, as we've all learned over these months, the best way to stay safe is basically hole up in a room and don't leave.
I mean, for me, I got to have the discipline not to go down to Little Italy and get an eggplant parm. That's, it's going to be tough. I got to. And then, Kyle, did I see correctly that there will be blood, there will be punishment if some of these guidelines are violated, that there's actually a fine structure as well in place for NFL players?
Yeah, it looks that way. And I mean, I think when you look at protocols and everything that they line up, if you went by the letter of the law and followed everything perfectly, you'd be in a really good situation team-wise. And we just have to figure out how realistic it is to get 53 players or more on the same page who are inevitably in their 20s or 30s and rich and used to doing things their way. So it's easy to have protocols and to threaten fines and to do all this stuff, but I think the proof will be in the pudding when we get to, a few weeks into the season. And I feel like there's going to be teams that do a good job of following it and some teams that maybe are too lax and don't adhere. And the good thing is, from a Cardinals perspective, as of this taping, there hasn't been a positive test. And it seems like especially the high profile players are doing a good job of taking it seriously, which to me will really cascade down upon an entire roster when you see your stars doing things a certain way. So there's an element of luck to it, and we'll see what happens. And it's such a contagious virus that it's hard to keep away. But from the early going, it does seem like the Cardinals are on the right track, at this point at least.
Even that little video of Kyler and Fitz playing chess, right? They're on opposite ends of the chessboard, so it looked like they were socially distanced. They had masks on, even though they've theoretically ostensibly tested negative and they're inside, the Cardinals facility, because if they had tested positive, obviously they wouldn't be allowed in that locker room. But just little glimpses like that, you can see how life has changed, and they're following those protocols, Darren. So, that'll be interesting. But at the same time, I was also reminded that the NFL structured the first month of the schedule accordingly, right? For example, week 2, those teams who play each other in week 2 have the same bye weeks. Everyone has the same number of home and away games in the first month. So if for some reason things were pushed back or eliminated in September, every team would still be on a competitive level playing field when it comes to the schedule. I mean, there are provisions in place because we know from week to week it can radically change.
It's funny. I know, and I certainly don't want to throw any shade on things like mandatory Murray, things that you might have come up in the past. But I really feel like our catchphrase around here for this season, Paul, needs to be everything is week to week, week to week. And I think things are going well right now, generally in the NFL. They're clearing up some of the things. I saw the news report. It was big news when both Gardner Minshew and Matthew Stafford ended up on the COVID list. And you get worried, but you can't forget that the COVID list is not only for people that test positive, but if you've been exposed to somebody that has COVID. And in both cases, apparently, well, in Minshew's case, he had been exposed and then he tested negative, so he was fine. In Stafford's case, he apparently had a false positive. He had tested false, negative, and then got a false positive, so they were just being careful. So in both those cases, that turned out well. And so you're feeling fairly good about where this is going, but these teams haven't practiced yet in terms of getting on the field and going like a real football team does. And there haven't been any games, and there hasn't been any travel. And I think ultimately we take this all week to week. And I think right now it sounds good, but I saw somebody online, somebody tweeted at somebody and said, some NFL person, and said, what do you think the chances are the NFL gets to week 17? And the person answered, well, let's see if they can get to week 1 first. And I think ultimately that's kind of where we need to be. Yeah. Sounds good right now. We're still more than a month away from when the first games are. You're right. It ultimately, those first couple of weeks could be impacted, but we'll have to see. Right now, it feels a little bit better. Without any games, until then, you should be somewhat okay. But as we've seen with the Marlins and the Cardinals, things can change in a second. And so I'm taking it all week to week.
The honest bottom line answer is we don't know. No one knows whether you can play full contact football during a pandemic. And the NFL is first in. We don't have any results from the high school game. We don't have any results from the college guys. Now there's some Aussie rules football, New Zealand and down under and so forth, and they've made it work. And the NFL actually consulted with that league along with some of the soccer leagues that have been going on through Europe. But ultimately, Kyle, I mean, you're talking this isn't baseball where occasionally you'll come across a first baseman after a single. You got to stand at home plate for an at-bat next to a catcher and an umpire. This is full contact, get slammed to the turf, and dogpiled football that they're going to have to somehow navigate through.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from that perspective, it seems like there's a higher risk. But to me, it feels like the riskier part of it is the players at home or, out and about in their daily lives beyond the practice field and in the facility. I get that there's going to be full contact, but if you can figure it out where you can get this testing down and you're pretty confident that everybody on that field is negative, then you'll be in pretty good shape. And I understand only one bad test or somebody that contracts the virus after testing, and that could throw everything off. But I'm less worried about that part of it and more worried about, just the outside factors and going to grab dinner or going to a party or doing whatever, things like that, or even just your significant other getting it and passing it along. It doesn't have to be necessarily nefarious, but there's a lot of ways to get coronavirus. And I personally feel like that's more likely to infiltrate a team more so than them passing it around on the field.
That's a great point. So here's my segue. Chills. D-Hop has chills. Has nothing to do with the coronavirus, COVID, none of the, right? It has to do with Darren. Drum roll, please.
It has to do with DeAndre Hopkins saying that he got chills when he put on the Cardinals uniform for the first time. And I know you made a little joke about it, but I'll be honest, when I first heard him say it, I was all ready to tweet it out, and I did, but I hesitated for a moment because in the day and age that we're in right now, I'm like, okay, does this make it sound like he feels sick? And in fact, I had a couple of people respond in that way. So, but it's great to hear Hopkins be so excited about playing for this team and wearing this uniform. I mean, this feels a lot more like he got what he wanted beyond just moving on from Houston, that he ended up on a team he really wanted to be at. The one that really kind of struck me, there's a photo from Cardinals Media Day when he put on the uniform and they took a bunch of pictures that I happened to actually run with my story about Hopkins on azcardinals.com. And it's a great photo of him with a big smile, no helmet on. And he took that photo and tweeted it out himself. And he just said, "Forever mood." And obviously things change and we'll see what happens with that contract raise he might want to get and all these things. But when you got a player of his ability and his stature and tweeting out a picture of him in your team's uniform, and he's basically saying, "Forever, I'm going to be happy," that's a good start. We'll say that's a good start.
Someone asked him, might have been you, Kyle, about whether he had been in a spread / no-huddle offense before. He mentioned his junior year at Clemson, and just offhand said, "Yeah, we ran that my junior year. They brought in a coach who specialized in that, and I think I had 18 touchdowns." That was, to me, that was a mic drop of sorts. He didn't even realize that he just sort of worked in, "Yeah, I think I had 18 touchdowns that season." How effective, how quickly do you think D-Hop can be in this Cardinals offense?
I think immediately. I mean, it's not a super it's not a hard offense to pick up. And like you said, if they go no huddle and push the tempo, it's more about kind of quick game passing and isolating guys and getting them in good positions. It's not super intricate from what I've seen. So knowing his breadth of knowledge and knowing where Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray are as far as being on the same page, and Cliff Kingsbury's ability to dial up certain ways to get guys involved, I think there's going to be very little of a learning curve for DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, he's an all-pro receiver who knows what to do, who has the talent to back it up. It wouldn't surprise me if he came out in game one and had 100 yards receiving.
What about Kyle? Right back at you. Chemistry with Kyler. Do we need to sort of pump the brakes there? What does that mean to you? How do you define chemistry in your analytics world?
I can't define it in my analytics world, which makes it tougher. He did say he wants to be best friends with Kyler Murray, so that's a good start, and they do seem to vibe. But you're right. I mean, can we really quantify how much chemistry they missed out on not throwing together in the offseason? Is it going to be a big deal? Is it not? I mean, I just said I think he can hit the ground running, so I obviously don't think it's a huge concern. And there might be small intricacies that they don't quite have that Kyler Murray has with somebody like Christian Kirk because he's been working with him for several years. But DeAndre Hopkins is that good, and we've all gotten on a field playing football with somebody, and you realize how fast they are and what they can do in their skill set, and you figure it out pretty fast. And I know the NFL is a different level, but I think they can still be very productive together from the jump.
I threw this out as an example of chemistry from last year. Wolf shot me down. I think he just doesn't have the recollection that I have of the play-by-play. And so, I think but I threw this out there in the Falcons game. If you guys remember, Cardinals were deep in their own territory. And this is one of those deals where Kyler avoided a blitz from the edge on the left side to his left. And he turned his back to the line of scrimmage, turned his back, did a pirouette, circled around, set his speed, threw a strike right down the middle to Larry Fitzgerald, who was coming back to the quarterback.
I remember that.
I use that as a potential example of chemistry, thinking, okay, Kyler's improvising, running for his life. Larry has the wherewithal to know, I better come back to my quarterback, give him an option. Now, maybe you do that with any quarterback. I don't know. But to me, that's an example of I kind of know where my quarterback's going. And the quarterback's saying, I kind of know where my safety valve is going to be number 11.
I see what you're saying. I do think there's a certain level that all wide receivers understand in a scramble drill situation. If you've noticed that your quarterback's on the move, there needs to be a little bit of chemistry. But it's funny because I'll be curious to know. I think Kyler's going to be looking for the first guy he can find. Hey, I see a red jersey. Let's find him. I don't know if it's necessarily going to matter. I mean, does it matter if it's Hopkins or if it's Fitz or if it's Kirk and that? I mean, it'll just depend on where those guys are on the field. I mean, if Hopkins is on the other side of the field than where Murray is, he can come back as best he can. Kyler's never going to see him. And so, but I do think, look, chemistry will mean something. For me, chemistry is less about maybe broken plays and more about, okay, Kyler Murray likes to throw it here, or as a receiver, DeAndre Hopkins likes to have it right here, especially if a guy's on his hip or whatever. It reminds me of when we talk about chemistry, Paul, because you and I are old heads and we've been around long enough. Kurt Warner gets to the Cardinals, and for a while there, Larry Fitzgerald was getting frustrated because Kurt would not, if he felt like he was covered, he would not throw it to Larry. And Larry finally went to him and said, dude, I will catch it. If you put it in traffic, I know I don't look open, but I will get you the ball. And, coaches go to Kurt and say, you got to trust him a little bit on this. And slowly Kurt realized, okay, throwing him the ball when he's not quite as open is different than throwing him the ball when he's not quite as open. And that's, to me, that's what Kyler has to figure out with DeAndre Hopkins. What's my level? What's my risk level when I throw it to him in this spot or this spot or this spot? And what plays can he make? What is he not as comfortable with? And how does that fit with my game? That, to me, is the chemistry he needs to find.
And by the time the Cardinals hit the playoffs for the 2008 postseason run, how many times did we hear Dave Pasch, and we heard it on Cardinals archives, right? How many times did Dave Pasch say, the ball's up in the air, Larry's double covered, it doesn't matter, he comes down with it anyway.
The whole point of some of those spectacular catches in that playoff sequence was because he was covered, and he probably should have been throwing the ball, and he made the catches. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that's what a big part of this is going to be.
Something that came to my mind on the flip side is Amari Cooper going to the Cowboys, immediate success. Somebody like Randy Moss when he went to the Patriots. I think star receivers are going to perform no matter what. So if they were together for 5 years, yeah, maybe they'd be fractionally better, but I wouldn't lower expectations because of a lack of chemistry.
Kyle, I think too of, okay, if DeAndre Hopkins had come from the Chargers and had spent his whole career playing with a Phillip Rivers or maybe a Tom Brady or a Big Ben. We're talking about oak trees who just stand in the pocket and really aren't very mobile. But, when he played with a Deshaun Watson, who has a similar skill set, obviously, to a Kyler Murray, and is able to extend a play and has the escapability, and you're used to your quarterback all of a sudden perhaps running for his life and looking for an outlet valve, that gives me hope. That makes me bullish, Kyle, that, okay, this can be a pretty seamless transition from one quarterback to the other.
Yeah, he naturally gets that. And I think that's a big part of where the Arizona Cardinals offense can improve, because last year, which surprised me, is Kyler Murray was one of the least efficient passers outside the pocket in the NFL. And you would think with his mobility and I mean, he's not just getting out and throwing it away. He's getting out and getting away from guys, and he can look down the field. So I think if Kyler Murray progresses and is able to keep his eyes on multiple outlets when he's out of the pocket, and if the scramble drill type things with the receivers, they get better at that. I mean, considering Kyler Murray was pretty good in the pocket and that's more stable, it's good that he was. And then if he can add this second element of turning broken plays into something big, I think that's where the Cardinals can really take off.
All right, so this is the part of the Cardinals Underground podcast where I'm going to look into my crystal football. I'm not going to quite use the word mandatory, and I'm not going to necessarily hashtag it future of football or go with the whole TikTok thing, but I am going to go on the record and say,
Wait, real quick. TikTok might be banned by the president, so be careful about that.
That is true. That is true. That's why Wolf isn't our guest today, because Wolf's still in mourning over possibly losing out on TikTok. So here's my full expectation. I think I've said this before with you guys, but I heard it a little bit. Heard it with DeAndre Hopkins. He mentioned no huddle twice. He brought it up.
Yeah,
I think, to me, that's the evolution of this offense. Whether they're going to be a lot of 10 personnel, who knows? I'm not sure. I think they're permanently more of a balanced running team that perhaps even Cliff Kingsbury ever envisioned when he got to the NFL. And I think they use more tight ends because of that. But I do think and fully expect, Darren, the Cardinals to be much more up-tempo, no huddle. I can't tell you how many times DJ Humphries told us in the Big Red Rage, with a few times per game when they would go no huddle after a first down and they'd be on a hop, get up to the sticks, let's go. He said within 6 or 7 snaps, the entire front seven was gassed. Guys weren't getting off the field. He said they absolutely had an advantage. And I think that if this Cardinals offense takes the next step, that's one big area.
So here's my question about that, Paul. And I could see that. I mean, it makes sense in a step forward kind of, Cliff Kingsbury year 2, I've done this and this, now we can do a little bit more of this. Will you be, let's say you want to do it, will you be able to do it early in the season when you don't have as many practices and you have no preseason games? I mean, that would be my question. I think given their personnel, I think it could make some sense. I wonder if, and I'm not even talking about digesting it from a playbook standpoint. I'm literally talking about a conditioning standpoint and being ready to do it.
That's true. I do remember, and you guys might have been there, it was towards the end of last season, and it was Justin Pugh talking about, I could go run a marathon right now. So my cardio is so far beyond where it's ever been as an offensive lineman, and just Justin Pugh talking about the sort of shape he was in cardio-wise and the ability to have to keep up with the Cardinals offense. Hopefully, guys got the message. Now, you didn't have a lot of supervision. You weren't able to work the guys out. Who knows how disciplined they needed to be, or ultimately they were. To your point, Darren, I guess you'll find out right away in camp where the conditioning level is at. But you're right. You absolutely do need the conditioning, or the whole thing will implode in front of you.
I think they're 100% going to try it. I agree with you, Paul. I think Cliff Kingsbury's ideal vision is to have the no huddle be a big part of it. And I think, honestly, last year they would have loved to do more no huddle, but the offense wasn't consistent enough. And when you're not getting first downs, it's hard to run no huddle. So I think, he looks at his firepower. He looks at Kyler feeling more comfortable in his second year. And you look at some of the advanced numbers, and they were more efficient no huddle than they were huddling. And I think knowing that, it pushes you to do it more. And yeah, I mean, the conditioning is a part of it, but if you tell the guys, hey, we want to run no huddle a lot, then yeah, it is incumbent on them to be ready. And then it's an exciting thing too. Hey, we're going to run no huddle. We're going to be, we're going to be aggressive and try to push the tempo on these guys. And I think the offensive players like that.
And just to clarify, I know you guys know this, but in terms of who's listening to us right now, don't forget that no huddle doesn't necessarily mean up tempo all the time. You can go no huddle and then stand at the line of scrimmage for 15 seconds and just, kind of freak out the defense a little bit, or call no huddle and then go up and pretend you're going to snap it quickly and slow down and run the ball a couple times. It doesn't mean, you're going to run to the line of scrimmage, go back, throw a pass, run up the line of scrimmage, go back, throw another pass. I mean, that's not necessarily what could happen. There's a lot of different ways you can handle it. But if you get to a point, and this is where like somebody like Dan Arnold, to me, means so much. Now, I don't know if Dan Arnold is going to be accused of being a great blocker anytime soon. I'm sure he's working on it. But if you can get to a point where you can get a base offensive package and have them do a bunch of different stuff, whether Dan Arnold can split wide as an inside receiver or be a tight end, or have Larry Fitzgerald maybe do a couple more things or whatever it might be, and you don't sub as much, but you do go no huddle, that makes it really tough on the defense. Because they can't necessarily sub because you're not taking anybody out of the game, but they can't necessarily catch their breath with all the different things you're doing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many times have we seen the Rams and Sean McVay? They did that. They got the Cardinals with that a lot in that loss at London, if you remember. They did a lot of that where they go up tempo, no huddle, and then the Cardinals, okay, are we subbing? Are we not subbing? Oh, they're a little confused. Snap the ball. A lot of times you're looking at the defense, and that'll dictate when you snap the ball. If there's even a hint of confusion or alignment issues, then all of a sudden, boom, that ball is out into the quarterback's hands, and they're making you pay, and he's just getting it to someone in space. Here's what we need to figure out, though. When we talk about Cardinals camp powered by Cox, somebody needs to dig in. The two insiders on this Cardinals Underground, you guys need to figure out, what does the conditioning test consist of? Because if the conditioning test consists of a 10K, then that might be a sure sign that all of a sudden cardio is of utmost importance. And then, they're going to be going a lot more up-tempo this year. That's just a thought. That's just me wondering, if it's going to be a traditional conditioning test or is it something radical this year?
Do you have a conditioning test if you've spent the last 3 weeks conditioning before camp starts?
You're right. Who knows? You're right. You're right. Everything's out the window at this point.
Week by week, Paul. Week by week.
Speaking of, it sounds like it's going to be well into August, right, Cal, before we're seeing the Cardinals on that field. And Cards Camp powered by Cox involves full pads, which is what we're all waiting for. I don't have any expectation that's going to happen before mid-August, probably, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to head out to State Farm Stadium next week and start to ramp up from there. But you're right, there's the acclimation period and you do some stuff without pads. So it's going to be a little while, but it's not that far off any longer. There's been ups and downs in the off season. There's the excitement of DeAndre Hopkins and the draft, and then it certainly felt like there was a lot of idle time waiting for the season to happen. So there are a couple more weeks left before they're on the field, but you are kind of over that horizon and seeing some football getting closer at least. So, and I'm sure everybody, once they get on the field, everybody's going to be excited to see these Cardinals. And, we have this backdrop of COVID-19 and wondering what it's going to do to the season. And you just hope that everything's normal because there is all this excitement with the team and where it can go. And like Darren said, it's week to week and fluid, and we'll see how it plays out. But hopefully there aren't any huge obstacles so we can kind of properly appreciate the trajectory this team could be on.
I still say, and I'm not as I don't believe as much in this proclamation maybe as the earlier one, but
good way to qualify this statement, Paul. I don't believe in what I'm about to say.
I still think there's going to be more physicality than maybe we all expect. Just in the absence of preseason games.
Pretty boy football.
I forget what it is. I mean, to play real football, you got to practice real football. There's got to be some full live go sessions. I think you got to be real apprehensive if you're a coaching staff to go against the Niners and how physical that Niners defense plays, for example, and even the Niners offense. We know they're a straight ahead running offense. They'll just road grade you. I think there's got to be some moments of full contact, full go physicality in camp.
I understand the point, and I don't disagree with your idea. Here's my question, and I know if you're not opting out, you're playing football, but consciously or subconsciously, is it going to be tough for some players once we're actually out on that field playing real football to go all out with COVID in the back of their minds? I wonder about that a little bit.
Yeah, and then you know what? Darren, is that a bigger problem than it seems? If you're out there, it's sort of like coming off an injury. And if you don't truly trust the injury, you're not willing to test it, then all of a sudden you're 90% of the player you used to be. So what does that mean? If guys aren't willing to play at the sort of intensity level that they need to play, then all of a sudden they're going to be a liability on that field, wouldn't they?
I mean, again, I don't anticipate it being so over the top, because obviously if it is, then you're not going to be on the field anyways. But right now I'm more, and I'm not a football player by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm more thinking about how it's been just in life in general. Now, I know everybody thinks about this a little bit differently, and you'd be naive to think that there aren't players in that locker room right now that are like, okay, we're going to follow all the protocols and we're going to do what it takes to do because we're team players. But I still don't know if I really need to wear a mask, and I will, but I don't know if I need to, and I don't know if this is that big of a deal. The percentages say there have to be some players like that. And I just know for me, when I go into a store, when I go into a restaurant just to pick up food, it feels weird to me. I've eaten in a restaurant one time since this all started. It was a couple weeks ago. It was for lunch. There was nobody else in the place. We were off in a corner, and it was one of those, it was something where you just go up to the counter and get something. So it's not like there was waiters and waitresses, and we're sitting on the corner, and we wore masks when we weren't eating. But the whole time there was like this under the surface vibe, uncomfortable vibe for me. I'm like, that I shouldn't be here, and this just feels wrong. And again, everybody feels a little bit differently, but you wonder if there's going to be any of that when there's actual games that happen or practices or whatever.
Well, remember, sports is a reflection of society. It's just an institution within society. If you see it in society, you'll see it in sports. So, and I'm with you. I haven't been to a single restaurant. I had to get a wisdom tooth pulled. Well, I didn't do that when I was 20 years old. I have no idea. And so I'm walking in, and the guy to my right in the dentist's waiting room has a mask on. He's 10 feet to my right. Great. I sit on the other end. Well, just to my left, about 2 feet away, are 3 chairs. 2 women sit down, mask pulled down, chatting it up. And they're 2 feet away. And I got up and I walked out into the breezeway, and I went outside and I waited a good 20 to 30 minutes when it was $1.16 that day, and waited. But, now they had a much different mindset than I did when it came to the mask.
Doctor's office didn't say something to him?
Not only that, when I was in the breezeway, 2 other people walked into the dentist's office. Neither one was even wearing a mask.
Come on, man.
And so, believe me, that should have been enough for me just to leave and just cancel the tooth pulling right there. That should have been my excuse and me to pull the ripcord. But, other than that. So, Kyle, let me ask you this. Other than right tackle, which you already covered, if you want to get one answer, if there's one question that needs to be addressed in this camp, have I asked you this before? Where are you leaning right now? Give me the latest on what you want to see the most, what you're anticipating the most.
You mean from a position battle standpoint or overall?
Yeah, just any questions going into camp other than seeing Kyler Murray in person now that he's all jacked up, with the extra body mass. Other than Kyler Murray, being able to apparently bench press 400 pounds now.
I mean, that is a legitimately interesting one, seeing him bigger. And does that take away from his speed at all? I mean, he's a fast guy, and you add some mass. Obviously, you want more durability. Does it affect your top end speed? So that'll certainly be a topic. Anything Kyler Murray, I think, is a topic right now.
Is he going to run between the tackles like Lamar Jackson all of a sudden? Is that why he put on 15 pounds of sheer muscle?
We've seen him slide way too often to think that.
But do you know he got 15 pounds, or are you just pulling that number out of the air?
I threw that out there.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
I go back to the other side of the ball, and it's interesting to see how motivated Patrick Peterson is, and you can tell that he is dead set on having a good season and showing that I'm a top 100 player. I'm an elite cornerback. I'm not the guy you saw last year. And at 30, it's a legitimate question now because of the way, athletes peak when they're younger, and you can say athletes are on their downslope at 30 years old. So there's a rational question as to, is Patrick Peterson as good as ever? And it's fun to see him so motivated. And in the past, he hasn't needed that motivation. He's been among the best, and nobody questioned that because he's been so consistently good for so long. And I'm really interested to see what kind of season he have if he can get back into that upper echelon of cornerbacks in the NFL.
Did you guys happen to see his Instagram post with him and Robert Alford? I mean, obviously that doesn't necessarily prove that they can cover guys, which I'm really not that worried about either one of those, to be honest. But they are shredded. I mean, they took a picture of them with their shirts off, and those dudes have like 8-packs, and I'm like, holy crap! In an off season where, you know, it's hard to get to gyms and work out with people and stuff, they look amazing. We won't have to worry about them being in shape getting into camp by any stretch of the imagination, both of them.
Which year was it where, in Pat's opinion, he struggled? Was it year 3 where he got heavy? It was before the diabetes, right? And then he got his diet in order. I remember asking him, well, what was your weight, you know, at its worst, your playing weight during the season? And he said he got up to 220 plus. Yeah. Think about that, because at the end of last season, I remember him telling the media he was 202, 203. So think about a 20-pound difference in Patrick Peterson based on what we're seeing now versus early in his career as a cornerback. We're not talking about an offensive lineman. I mean, that's got to make such a difference just in his quickness and his coverability, right? To me, that's it's astonishing almost. And then when you consider Darren, and someone asked him this earlier when he met the media via Zoom, that his wife, Antonique, is a doctor. She's been on the front lines of COVID, and we know his medical condition. I mean, if anybody could hit the pause button and have cause for concern, guys, right? I mean, Kyle, it could be Pat P, but we've seen no indication of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate question when you have a risk like that medically, and also he's, like you said, he's very in tune with what's going on, having his wife deal with COVID-19 so regularly. So he's not somebody that's just out of sight, out of mind with it. He completely understands the situation and the gravity of it. So yeah, I mean, legitimately thought it was a question to me, like, would he want to play? He's that type of veteran who has enough money in the bank. He's done plenty, but you know, you see these Instagram posts of him working out and him motivated. It seems pretty clear that he wants to play, and you know, he can obviously opt out. He's got a couple more days, but I'd be surprised at this point because of the way he's putting out things on social media, talking about, you know, this season of comeback for him.
If you were to do a last dance on an Arizona Cardinal this season, Patrick Peterson would be intriguing. His home life, with his wife getting back from the hospital with COVID, everything he's going through, being left out of the top 100, the low, the high being all decade, everything, getting in shape, having young children, right? I mean, everything involved in Pat P's life and going into this season and how this season comes out and the contract year and everything else involved, training camp against DeAndre Hopkins. Man, I don't know if we're going to see that, but I'm all in. More so than just the first live O-line, D-line drills. I just want to see Pat P square up a couple of times in coverage against DeAndre Hopkins.
So does that mean this ends with him winning a championship?
You know,
I can tell you this.
Yeah.
I don't care if they could win the championship. Patrick Peterson ain't retiring after this year. I can absolutely tell you that.
No, you're right.
It won't be the last dance per se.
Well, maybe he leaves football for golf instead of Jordan leaving basketball for baseball. I don't know, but you know, to me it's compelling. Do you not? I mean, it would be compelling. No. If they had footage behind the scenes and went all access, I mean, All or Nothing was great 5 years ago. But if you want to take out just one player and follow his story from home to work and everything in between that's involved, Pat P right now, I think is some intriguing stuff.
I would agree with all that. I mean, I think it's a great storyline to follow. I mean, super motivated because of his contract and just with everything and what he had gone through. It was nice. DeAndre Hopkins was asked about Patrick not getting on that top 100 list, and he goes, yeah, it's not fair. After he went through all those injuries last year, and I'm thinking, there were no injuries. And I think down deep, Patrick is still, you know, upset about that and knows what it did to his reputation and wants to bring it back. And I'm with you guys. I think that's going to be a fascinating story. And in some ways, it's kind of gone under the radar. Because of how he went last year and how things went for him. And, you know, I think there are a lot of fans that have grown weary of him for whatever reason. I don't understand it. I don't know why you'd get weary of a guy who's one of the best cornerbacks in the league from year after year. I know it's been interesting the last couple of years with a trade request and all that stuff, but I truly believe Patrick Peterson remains one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And as we've said, he's ultra motivated. So a lot of signs point to a good year for Patrick Peterson.
Kyle, any parting words? Any new analytics we need to be aware of? Anything from Pro Football Focus that has moved the meter with you?
No, but I would like to formally offer a challenge to Kyler Murray to play chess, because I feel like I would do better than Fitz. I'm a pretty good chess player, so I'd be confident in going up against him in that and just that.
See, I was just gonna say, for me, I'm willing to take some of those screenshots that DeAndre Hopkins has for his lock screen of the plays, and I can throw that on my lock screen. I'll start learning the playbook myself, when I have some downtime.
Now, Kyle, do you have anything on your resume? Like chess club, anything? I mean, what exactly? How accomplished and polished a chess player are you here?
To be honest, I won the kindergarten state chess championship. Not a joke. I got the silver dollar to prove it.
A state championship in kindergarten.
State of Arizona kindergarten state chess champion.
And I thought sports parents were crazy. They had a state championship for chess for kindergartners.
You didn't
know you were in the presence of greatness, did you, Paul?
I didn't know. You need to go on the gram and send out some video of that. Do you have a young toddler, Kyle? Do the parents still have some?
There's probably a picture of me on a podium somewhere holding up a chess piece.
That's right. That's good. Well, that's good. It's like
you did not see this coming, did you, Paul?
That's good. Well, I tell you what, if we have Kyler Murray in the Big Red Rage this year, Wolf's out, Kyle's in, and then in between you guys, we're gonna put up a little chessboard, and you guys could play chess during the course of the game, the show.
Are you guys gonna have one of those little things where you hit the timer after every move?
Yeah, I mean, I'm down to make it as official as he wants. We can do some clocks.
This is before your time, Kyle. If you want to go on YouTube, look up the Jim Belushi Saturday Night Live skit where he's the chess coach. And he's a chess coach in the same vein. This is back in the days of Bobby Knight. And he's screaming at kids and kicking chairs and throwing chess. And he's going berserk like a college basketball psycho coach, except he's the chess coach. Classic Saturday Night Live in its heyday.
I honestly gave it up because it did start getting a little bit too competitive. I got to third grade and I was still pretty good, but at that point it was already kids studying 2 hours a day. You got the coach over your shoulder yelling at you. I'm like, I'm good. I'm 10 years old. I'm going to retire.
I was like, I'm getting mind games from the opponents in chess. I don't need this.
It was too much pressure at 10.
Yeah. Well, man's got to know his limitations. I know I'm out. I just hit that little clock. And I'm out. So there you go. What is the saying at the end of the chess game again?
Checkmate.
There you go. That's Cardinals Underground.